The iconic rivalry between Jarheads and Flyboys has been seen countless times in the two combat arms' histories. But in the fluid and dangerous battle spaces of Halo, ranging from glass colonies, alien worlds, and even Forerunner megastructures, even the most hardened grunt will appreciate some close air support and speedy exfil. I'm Corporal Hotpockets, and today we are flying straight into UNSC Army and Marine Aviation. The Army and Marine Corps represent the ground-based components of the UNSC, with the Navy and Air Force representing the aerospace components, with each branch in turn specializing into its specific task within the broader division of defensive-centric, Army and Air Force, and offensive-centric, with the Navy and the Marine Corps, due to the Navy's FTL capabilities. Because of this, ground aviation is heavily dependent and shaped by its supporting aerospace branch. The way the two are meant together defines the scope and limitations of ground aviation in terms of what their missions are, what aircraft they use, and where their responsibilities end and the aerospace branches begin. We'll break down the Marines first to overview ground aviation broadly, to discuss where the Army specifics differ. The Marine Corps' aircraft are shaped by the missions they conduct, which fall under two broad categories. The first, representing the vast majority of what is seen, is small scale, on the order of company or battalion-sized task forces attached to individual Navy ships or small fleets, used primarily as rapid reaction and emergency forces. They are mostly made up of light infantry, heavily reinforced by ODSTs, and carry Warthogs and Scorpions as multi-purpose ground vehicles in the need for mechanized combat. Check out my ground combat overview for more details. Overall, despite their small size of a few hundred to 1,000, these task forces are very adaptable and well-rounded in combat, with the support and sustainment facilities being handled by the Navy ships the Marines are attached to. This close relationship carries over to the aircraft organization as well. Since the Marines are oriented for ground combat, space-oriented aircraft such as longswords, if present, would always fall under the Naval Command as an extension of the ship and its operations, whereas atmospheric air support, such as Pelicans and especially Hornets, would fall under the Marine Command to complement the fighting power of the Marine infantry. Much like the ground vehicles used, the Hornets are very adaptable in a variety of missions. They most closely resemble the modern-day Kiowa Warrior helicopters in capability, as they are used for air recon, light attack, anti-vehicle duty, and transporting small numbers of special operations forces, showing that Marines will maximize every single piece of equipment. The second major type of Marine operation seen is a large-scale deployment at the regiment, division, or corps/expeditionary force level. While a lot rarer than the previous type, they are nonetheless a critical service provided by the Marine Corps. In this type of mission, which is either defending an important colony or conducting a long-term planetary assault, Marine units will have all ground combat arms present, as well as sustainment and aircraft units in high proportion needed for a long-term operation. These larger units often contain not only light ground attack aircraft, like the Hornet, but also heavier attack aircraft, such as the Vulture, a large and well-armored flying tank, armed with powerful air-to-ground cannons, likely 30 to 40 millimeters in caliber, small air-to-air missiles to combat light enemy aircraft like the Banshees, and the devastating Phoenix missiles to obliterate the most powerful enemy ground vehicles. Additionally, the Marine Corps also has the Sparrowhawk, armed similarly with cannons and missiles, as well as the M6 Galilean nonlinear cannon, a powerful chin-mounted laser. Additionally, while not seen, the Marine Corps likely uses helicopters for short-range troop transports that don't require the Pelican's vastly superior lifting power. Speaking of, the Marines also possess fixed-wing air assets, such as the Short Sword Bomber, used for in-atmosphere heavy air support, Pelican dropships as the core of all tactical transport of troops and vehicles from ships to the surface and firebases and FOBs to combat zones, and longswords for aerospace defense against fighters and capital ships from groundside airfields. The latter two are also used by the Navy, with nearly identical model but vastly different missions and usage. Marine longswords still perform the same actions of atmospheric and aerospace defense as the ones used by the Navy, but do them in support of Marine units and operations, and are deployed either from groundside bases or onboard assault carriers used in such operations. Longswords carried on board Navy fleet carriers and other ships used to assist them in ship-to-ship combat are most likely used by the Navy as part of naval operations. With Pelicans, there is more ambiguity. Most Pelicans seen on board Navy ships, such as the Pillar of Autumn, Enamor-clad, and Forward into Dawn, are marked with Marine markings and play crucial roles in transporting troops and vehicles groundside. However, some of the pilots and units of these Pelicans are listed as naval for the Autumn and larger ships like the Spirit of Fire and Infinity. This is because the same platform is used in two very different but overlapping contexts. For the Marines, who require mostly in-atmosphere transport and close air support, the Pelican represents a continuation of the in-atmosphere light attack air transport VTOLs used, with the added benefit of space capability, hence why it's prominently seen on the small ships carrying Marines groundside, and assisting them once they're there, alongside other Marine aircraft such as the Hornets and Vultures. For the Navy, however, Pelicans are small transport aircraft near the bottom of their logistical assets in larger marine operations, dwarfed by the Condors, Albatrosses, and Herons, only larger than the Darters. Like all these other transports, the Naval Pelican is used to transport troops and supplies in a marine operation as part of the heavier logistical support, i.e. bringing down fire-based components, supplies, and troops too, but ideally not in the first wave assault, but rather reserves and reinforcements in the depth of an established perimeter, rather than the first wave assaulting a beachhead like the Marines would. The key distinction is that the Naval Pelicans are part of the logistical chain of a larger operation, while the Marine ones are used for direct assault in the first drop of troops directly into the combat zone. The ambiguity comes when both are seen in the same operation or area, such as big UNSC ships with large marine complements, like the aforementioned Spirit of Fire and Infinity. As the UNSC Navy and Marine Corps are based off of blue water navies and Marine Corps here on Earth, the space battlefield is not a factor yet, while water and air still are. Marines typically handle air transport from ship to shore, as well as close air support once there, while the Navy handles a larger landing craft over water. The closest modern-day analog to this synergy is between that of Marine Expeditionary Unit and an amphibious ready group. The MU is a large, flexible MAGTF with ground troops and air assets, including transports. The RG is the accompanying naval unit that transports and supports the MU, including landing craft. Once this concept is applied to space, it gets a bit confusing because these two elements are combined, but can still be understood if looked at closely enough. With the Spirit of Fire especially, the distinction can be seen very clearly, the Naval Pelicans being the ones bringing down base components alongside the other heavy lift transports mentioned earlier, while the Marine ones are used as direct assault and as gunships. However, war is messy and chaotic, oftentimes coming down to capability and availability. So if a task needs to be done, but the right Pelican unit isn't ready or prepared, but the other is, lives won't be risked because the Navy doesn't want to do the Marines dirty. Who does it comes afterwards. Army aviation is similar to both major types of marine aviation scenarios outlined, but different because of its opposite broad situation, with the Army almost always being on the defensive, guarding UEG worlds. Like the Marine Corps, aviation supports the Army's ground troops, with the sister branch present meant for aerospace support, but unlike the Marine Corps, the Army isn't often deployed on a smaller scale, instead only resembling the second scenario, but with the Air Force always present. Because of this, the Army lacks the heavier exo-atmospheric capabilities the Marines possess, such as longswords and Pelicans, with these being relegated to the Air Force, alongside in-atmosphere strategic aircraft, such as short-sword bombers, due to the usage on a planet-wide scale rather than being integrated into individual maneuver units. The main aircraft the Army does possess are ground attack aircraft, like the Skyhawk, similar to the Marine Vulture and Hawk, armed with 50mm cannons and Scorpion missiles, which is ironic because the main tank used by the UNSC is the Scorpion. But seriously, come on, I use the Scorpions to destroy the Scorpions, like what the frick. And the Wasp, similar to the Hornet, without the carrying capacity, and the Falcon, most similar to the modern-day Little Bird, with a 20mm chain gun, 2 side turrets that can either have a 30 cal machine gun or a 40mm grenade launcher, and room for 3 passengers, with a high lift capacity for its size, since it can accommodate all Spartans on board in their armor, which would weigh over 6,000 pounds, as much as a Warthog. For heavier air transport, the Army has begun adopting the Wyvern gunship, used by the CMA, and now several independent planets like Gao and possibly Venezia. It is a large and fast transport, heavily armed with an autocannon, 4 twin machine guns, 8 missile hardpoints, and room for 20 troops inside, making it perfect for transporting elite troops and supporting them after they drop. One aircraft category that seems absent but useful is a short-range but high-capacity transport, like a CH-47 Chinook or Mi-26 helicopter, with a capacity of a platoon or greater, 40 to 100 troops. This further adds to the Army's already weak air transport situation, as they also lack Pelicans, making it either entirely dependent on the Air Force for short-range lifts, or forced to stay groundside. The Army also possesses a fleet of water aircraft carriers, with Wombat drone fighter used for short-range in-atmosphere interception and ground attack, aiding in defensive colonies with large oceans. Overall, the Army has outsourced most of its heavy lift capability to the Air Force, which, while good for centralization and efficiency, lacks the flexibility of allowing local commanders to order actions performed rather than requesting aid from a separate branch. The Army and Marines field similar in-atmosphere aircraft, geared mostly for ground attack, recon, and light transportation, with the Marines possessing a powerful space-capable fleet as well that the Army does not. This is because while the Marine Corps relies on the Navy heavily, the two specialize in their specific domains, with the Navy handling space combat and heavy space-to-surface transport, and the Marines handling the initial assault from orbit, as well as the in-atmosphere combat and smaller transport, overall being very well thought out. The Army, however, is always in collaboration with the Air Force, with the two in a close partnership relying on each other. The Air Force keeping the skies clear and the glass away, and the Army protecting their air bases and other infrastructure, at least on paper. The Army's dependency on the Air Force seems a bit too high in the realms of transport, and it would be interesting to see what new tactics they can do if given more lift capability at the lower levels. If you want a super in-depth view on the UNSC branches and how they interact with and rely on each other, stay tuned. If you like this video, press the big red button to eradicate all the Xenos, and press the Liberty Bell to replace them with America. This has been Corporal Hotbox, showing you what the lady is like, one lesson at a time. And remember, Spartans, keep driving forward onto dawn.